Hello everyone, and thanks for returning to The Process. In our penultimate installment for the first phase of the 2023 Emmy season, we have a duo from Prime Video's epic fantasy series, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, director and co-executive producer Charlotte Brändström, and production designer Ramsey Avery.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Brändström, and I'm actually the director and also the co-executive producer on season 2 of The Rings of Power. And I also worked on season 1 with Ramsey Avery here, and where I came in and did episodes 6 and 7, sorry. I did episode 6 and 7 in New Zealand, where we met for the first time. So Ramsey, hello.
Hi.
I had the pleasure
Very good to see you again.
Yeah, I had the pleasure actually to speak to you for the first time when I was sitting in quarantine, and we were able actually to discuss this year's, and it was amazing actually. What the most fantastic about your work was that it was incredibly inspiring, and your concept work art was what inspired us more than anything else, because the episodes that I had to direct were obviously 6 and 7. They were very special. They were outside, and you had prepared the most interesting and amazing concept art for it. Do you always work like this, or was this very different for you?
Generally, we want to try to get that art going as much as we possibly can, because it's like you said, it's such a tool to be able to show everybody, the showrunners, the directors, the rest of the crews, just what we're trying to do. And if we can get the artwork to be pretty specific, then that helps the conversations go. I mean, two of the things that I know we worked on really carefully to start off with on episodes 6 and 7 were just looking at the battle in Tir Harad and where we could actually put people and how we would get people within the scenery, and trying to just take a look at how we might develop those positions and what that might do to start to inform what the fight choreography might want to be. And then even more importantly, that whole aftermath of the volcanic explosion and what the characteristic we wanted to try to get in that. So working with the showrunners initially to sort out this idea of what can look horrifying but still somewhat beautiful and keep that epic sensibility. But it's definitely using that art to be the starting point of conversations is, generally speaking, where I want to try to start anything, because it definitely gets the conversation going. I mean, if you put something in front of somebody and they hate it, well, then you've learned something, and then you can take another whack at it.
We thought the war at last was ended.
Today, our days of peace begin.
We thought our joys would be unending. We thought our light would never dim.
The skies are strange.
It is here, Galadriel. The moment we feared.
Evil does not sleep. It waits.
Beyond the darkness, tempting shadow, to bury us all beneath the mountain.
He has not one name, but many.
What were the first features you worked on? What were they like? Were they like fantasy? Did they create a new world, or were they more like standard?
Well, yeah, I pretty much started, well, in terms of features, I mean, my first work was in television and sitcoms, which is a very different environment entirely on all kinds of levels. But I was fortunate enough to start working in high concept work right off the bat as an art director and assistant art director. I worked on a couple of Spielberg movies to begin with, and I was AI, artificial intelligence, and Minority Report. So it kind of got me in the group of people that I was very happy to get involved with, and made the connections that I wanted to make, and kind of set me on a pathway. Where have you started in all of that?
I started in features. I started with I did actually historical features set during the Second World War in France, and I moved into comedies briefly, and then I went back into thrillers, and it's been mostly thrillers. And then lately it's been, as you know, more fantasy and more action adventure, different. But I've always tried to have, I always be interested in films that were visual, where you could actually leave a visual imprint behind. And the work with a production designer is already starts there. It's actually to find a threesome between the production designer, the DP, the director of photography, and me. And I feel that that dialogue is extremely important. And on the Rings of Power, what was even more important was also to include visual effects, because you were working a lot with visual effects. Will you tell us just a little bit, how did it start with visual effects? Did you start right away, or did you discuss the concepts with them, or how did it?
Yep, really pretty much, because the dictate from the very beginning, when I first started the show, one of the things that the showrunners were very specific about is that they wanted it to be as much in camera as we could possibly put in camera, so that to design the environments and to build them out as much as we possibly could, so that as much could be in camera as there would be. But, you know, it is epic, and the camera is going to go wider than anything we can possibly build. So it really was the issue of trying to stay in touch with visual effects from the very beginning, including we also had scale issues. You know, we had to be able to work with big people being little people as well. But so there really wasn't. I would do a piece of concept art working with our concept artists, or possibly in some cases we'd work with some version of a digital model. And I would take that really over to Jason Smith and Ron Ames, our visual effects supervisor and producer, and talk them through what I was trying to do here before I'd actually show it to anybody else, because it was absolutely critical to make sure that that handoff was doable, both in terms of technology and in terms of time and in terms of budget. So I would hopefully not come to the showrunners or to the DP or to the director with something that we didn't already have a plan in mind as to how to make it happen.
Mm. And I remember from working, I mean, when we worked together and we were talking a lot about lighting, you had created different lights for different sets. If you could tell us a bit the way you prepared it, because we were extremely pleased with the cinematographer that we were able, thanks to you, to make every set, every world look different, thanks to the lighting and to what you prepared for us.
Well, that was one of the things that actually was kind of important for me from the very beginning. It's one of the things I actually tell people who are coming into the business, or when I start working with new people in my art department. It's like, we're not designing scenery, we're designing light. It's really about where the light goes, where it bounces back, what color it bounces back in, where it's not. So every environment needs to really come from the idea of where is the light and what is the light doing. So very specifically in Lord of the Rings, we wanted to make sure that each culture had its own characteristic of lighting, so that the dwarves were always, as much as we could, be open source flame, because the dwarves are of stone and of flame, according to Tolkien. So we really wanted to make sure that that open flame was just described the dwarves. And the Númenóreans wanted to have beautiful Venetian glass, so it felt like the most elegant version of lighting that we could possibly get to. The elves were always about some kind of soft translucency, so that there was this very ethereal glow to their lighting. And then the Southlanders the idea behind the Southlanders is that they were the most primitive of the bunch, so that they had kind of exposed flame when they were torches, or that everything had what we called horn, where the idea is that antlers had been delaminated, and you use those thin planes of that horn to make lenses on top of lanterns, so that gave it a different color, so that literally every culture had like a different source of lighting or a different color of lighting, so that was one of those ways we could easily differentiate between the cultures when you went to each scene.
Yeah, that helped us enormously. And it helped us also to decide where to put the actor, how to do the blocking, and I mean, to get an atmosphere in each world. I mean, that helped us visually.
Well, and even the fact that a lot of it was, like you said, outside. So, you know, we're figuring out where the moonlight comes from and where the sunlight comes from, and trying to keep some kind of consistency with that, where it made sense to keep that consistency, so that it helped kind of do the placemaking as well.
Is it very different for you to have worked on Lord of the Rings and then do your Marvel show? Do you feel like you approach the lighting very differently?
Very differently. It's like, oh, we get to
one
use
is very naturalistic.
bulb.
One is naturalistic, and the other one is totally different, right?
Yeah, well, this particular project, the idea of this one is that it's very grounded, so it's not one of the more sci-fi elements versions of the MCU. So we are doing things in a certain way, the idea that it's all grounded light here in the same way that it's all grounded light in the Lord of the Rings. But we do have light bulbs, so we have a lot more control over how it's easier for the DP to control the lighting because he can dial in the LED. Every light fixture has an LED now inside of it, so they can change the color temperature or the literal color of each light, so that even a light bulb shifts colors in as much as they want to shift it. But that gives us a lot more control over the lighting than we had in Lord of the Rings, when it had to look like flame or it had to look like sunlight or moonlight. So
yeah,
we
and we
could actually
couldn't see anything before we turned on the flame. So we turned
right.
on. Everything was black on set. We tried to. No, what I found also was very helpful was actually to that everything was quite grounded and was real, and it was organic, and it was easy to block the scenes because the sets existed. We were just not walking around with green screens everywhere.
Yeah.
So you had given us a base to work on, and that base got obviously extended tremendously in VFX, but we had it, so it's easy to imagine the scenes, and you made it easy for us.
Oh,
thanks.
Cool. I mean, it's actually something that I believe strongly in, is that the environment has to tell the story. That's its function, but it can't tell the story if it's not functional. Like if the director and the DP can't get in and make the scene come to life within the environment, then I haven't done my job. So it's always part of that process is talking with the director about where do they want to put the camera? How do they want to get the scene to actually work? And can the DP get his cameras there and his lights there? I mean, I was amazed. Well, I'm always amazed when I walk onto a set that's out in the middle of nowhere and we're lighting it with sunlight, and yet there's giant cranes with big lights on them to make sure that we're really getting the sun in the same place all the time where we want it. And being able to work with the DP and the director to make sure that we have the positions for those giant cranes, because that's not something the audience is ever going to see, but it's critical to the being able to get the shot.
And what was the most difficult thing for you when you started on Lord of the Rings? Obviously, I was not there in the beginning. You worked with JA, I think, on the first episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little odd. I got kind of dive bombed halfway in, and we had to kind of start from scratch halfway in. So it was a bit of a mad scramble to do that. But just in general, the scope of the thing is crazy. That so much that we had to do, and all of it had to be kind of new. We weren't trying to reproduce what had been seen in the movies or what was seen by some other concept artist for Tolkien's work. So it was all coming up with fresh and new ideas that told a very specific story. And just the scope of that was intense. We had JA had requested at least 1 or 2 illustrations for every scene in the first 2 episodes, which was hundreds of pieces of concept art. And we ended up having people, I had people on 6 continents, like almost every continent other than Africa. So I guess it was 5 continents that we had people working, and multiple time zones. So there was somebody doing concept art or concept modeling somewhere in the world every moment of the day, 6 and 7 days of the week. So it was a huge undertaking. And then that's just on the concept level. And then trying to figure out, working with everybody, how to actually get it built and get it in front of cameras in the time and the money that we had, that the logistics of all of that were quite tricky, So that was, I would say that generally the biggest problem, or the biggest challenge, was just the overall scope of it. And then each individual scene had its own challenges. I mean, when we had the mountaintop camp for the Numenorian army, like,
I remember that one.
How in the world are we going to get a mountaintop camp for the Numenorian army when all we have are sheep paddocks within 30 miles of Auckland? Like, how do we make that happen? And you remember that we went through multiple versions of that. At one point, it was in a parking lot, and then and there were several different locations we looked at, and for various reasons, they didn't work, for access or for logistics or for lighting issues. And so we ended up going to a hillside where we'd shot not very far away from actually where the village is, just up down the road a little bit from the village, and building this encampment there, and working out with how do we then make that feel like it's right next to Mount Kidd, which is hundreds of miles away on the South Island, and we have to combine those two scenes together. So that's talking with Alex about the lighting, and talking with visual effects about the extensions and locations, making sure that we can get all the equipment and horses. How do you manage the horses and all of that? So that was tricky too. I mean, every kind of environment had that kind of complexity to try to figure out.
And you know what stayed with me really from that scene also is what you did to show the different way they would bury their deaths. The Numenorians versus the Southlanders, how they were dealing with death, and that was just created like a background, and it created an atmosphere. It was just beautiful and moving.
I think that's one of the things that is so important to me. Well, in any world building exercise, is that it's not just what's in the script and what's in front of the camera. It's how did it all get there? What's the history that you build up to get to that? And that happens whether you're doing a domestic interior because a family has lived there, and who is the family? Who are the people that come and go? Like, what is that history? And in Tolkien, it's particularly important because he's done all of that work, or he's built really thousands and thousands of years of history that he's delineated some form or the other. And to get that into our filmmaking is really important. And even more important, the reason why I kind of fought for that specifically, again, because it's not really in the script, right? It's just something to do some storytelling, is that the idea of death is so critical to the whole Numenorian story, because they don't want to die. The whole thing that drives their story is they don't want to die. And why do the elves get to live forever, but the humans don't? And so that I wanted to try to make sure that we had that underlying theme pretty much anywhere we had the Numenorians. I mean, in the city of Numenor, there are graves everywhere built into the buildings, so that you always have this sense of death underlying the Numenorians.
Yeah, you worked very well that way with the legendarium, and also with the history of everything, the background, the characters. So that gave it helped us to be grounded. It helped us to explain things to the characters. It sort of helped the lighting. It was very inspiring, actually. Like when I came in to do my episodes, I could not use anything that had been done before, because I obviously had to create a new world sort of covered in ashes, and had to do a battlefield, and I had to do things that had nothing to do with the other episodes. So I would have been lost without your concept art there, because when I first arrived, we discussed that, and I saw everything you prepared, and that was also very inspiring. Remember those woods under the ashes?
Yes. Yeah.
Orange colors.
Yep. That whole discussion about the progression of color from the deep kind of almost Mordor red all the way as it lightens up as they get further away, and it gets more and more amber and into yellow and then into clear by the time they get to the top of the mountain, and working with Alex to try to clarify each of those steps of the way, and understanding how that affects with visual effects too, because some of that's extensions and some of that they add some color tonality into the shot as well.
Soon you will understand the power of the unseen world.
does not sleep. It waits.
There's far more at stake here than just our lives.
Fight with me.
For all Middle Earth.
You was lost, but shall return. What are you? I am no god. At least, not yet.
You will be known at last for who you truly are. For you, our Lord Sauron.
If Sauron has returned,
And the Southlands are in grave danger.
the Southlands are but the beginning.
You had a great team there.
Oh my goodness. Oh yes, just remarkable team. Our supervising art director Jules Cook just kept on top of everything, and an amazing set decorator, and our greens team were just insanely good. I just loved the greens people, because every time we'd have to go into some forest that has to look like Middle Earth, but is covered with pongas and nikaus, tree ferns and little palm trees, and try to figure out how to make those go away without cutting them down, because you don't want to cut down the native plants, and trying to figure all that out. It just really was that the team that we had in New Zealand really was just remarkable.
Oh, it's a great experience.
How's it different working for you on season 2? What are the differences now that it's been kind of established for you, but it's carrying on the story in different ways? How is the process different for you?
It's carrying out certain things. So certain things are actually carrying on, because we still have Mordor. We still have a world that is the same as in season 1. There's other worlds are newer. Things are changing. So, and it's obviously the landscape is changing too, because we're now in England and not in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sets, and there were a lot of the sets that you built, they've been brought over here, that we're just building to and adding. I mean, it's like add-ons. What is easier in your second season compared to the first is that you don't need to be so presentational in the beginning. You know the characters, so it becomes darker and more dramatic, I think.
Oh, cool.
And because you go right into the characters. And it's probably a bit more violent. And then I have a big battlefields. But like in New Zealand, just rain and mud and lights and torches and everything that we established together. You just try to continue as well as you can with what you have. And what I love about this show is that it's really about character. It's grounded and it's organic, and there's no magic that is not justified. There's no weird light effects, but the magic comes from the sky, from the wind, from the ashes, from the fire. And we continued with the sort of the lighting we established in season 1 as well. And I obviously have Alex with me again, the cinematographer.
Oh, cool. Yeah, he's wonderful. He's a wonderful collaborator and just insanely talented. He's really great.
And his lighting he's very well fit for this show, because his lighting is very naturalistic.
Yeah.
So it sort of goes with what we have and using. And that's why your lighting elements were so important. We had so many discussions about those, but that's been insanely helpful.
Well, and it goes back to that idea of grounded, and how you can, light is integral to light will give away a scene more quickly than anything else. If the light feels like it's coming from the wrong place, or it's the wrong color temperature, it'll just set the scene off in the wrong direction.
And so what were your best moments in season 1? What was your
wow.
Which sets did you prefer to create? What was
I
the
guess
most exciting and the most difficult?
The set that I mean, there's just so much about everything that I just was really happy with. I mean, I loved how grounded Tirharad felt. Like, it just felt perfectly nestled, like it had been nestled into that valley for 1,000 years. I thought that was just, I was very happy with the way that all turned out, because those sets are really tricky. They can look really artificial if you don't get the aging right, and if you don't get the greens right in them, they can just not look real. And I was very happy with the way that turned out. I mean, one of the things that wasn't necessarily, although you did shoot a little bit on it, I loved the ship. I'd never been able to build a ship before. So to be able to build a ship and to figure out what a Tolkien ship would look like and what that would mean for the Númenóreans and how that made it special and how we could move away from all the tropes we've seen of ships that just generally end up looking like some version of a pirate ship. So trying to figure out how this was very specific to our world and it told our story. And then to get to build the thing and then put it on a gimbal and really work out the rigging with rigging designers and getting sailors as extras so that the rigging could actually work. And then, I mean, the moment when the first time that they put the lights on and it's got all these extras and actors and Kate Howley's spectacular costumes and the wind machines start going up and the water cannons start throwing water onto the ship and the gimbal is going. It's like, wow. It's like, I just love that. Goosebumps, you know, it was just a remarkable moment.
Yeah. And did you work a lot with Kate? I mean, as far as colors and
Oh yes. Yeah, very, very much. She's a genius. I mean, there's just really no other word for her. She came in because I came in and she'd already been doing work. So she had already kind of developed a bit of vocabulary with the showrunners. And she had these mood boards that were combinations of her sketches, which are just pieces of art in and of themselves, and great historical references that kind of tied into where we wanted to kind of ground each culture. And so it was a remarkable place to start, that there was already this basis of agreement in terms of some tone and some history that I was able to just kind of instantly leap into. But Kate and I talked all the time because it's so critical how that she's creating the vocabulary of the world on the characters and I'm creating the vocabulary of the world that the characters live in, and those colors and those textures and the design details all have to be they all have to talk to each other in a way that feel organic and natural. And one of Kate's things was to make sure that we're never like just doing repeaty. Like I didn't take her detail and then put it 10 feet tall on a wall someplace, or she didn't take a detail that I had that then she had to rework it into smaller things. And there were some things, like we had a whole conversation about how to differentiate the epicness of the elves from the epicness of the humans. And in Tolkien, the elves were first born on the shores of a vast inland lake, on shores of pearl under the stars. So Tolkien calls them the children of the stars. When the time the men come around a couple thousand years later, it's the first time, literally, for a long story, which I won't get into here, that the sun actually rises. It's the first time the sun is created. And as the sun rises, the men come to life. So the men are the children of the sun. So working with Kate to kind of work out this iconography of stars and suns and how the stars become the elves and how the Númenóreans are all about the sun, you know, like that great headpiece that Muriel wears is just spectacular. But she and I worked very carefully and deliberately trying to figure out where those different motifs of the sun could work into the weapons and her costumes and the banners and the motifs inside the court. All looked like it was all one bit of the same idea, but it also had been created over thousands of years of history. So there's layers and shifts and changes, and each character has a slightly different feel. But that was all about constantly keeping in contact with her.
That was interesting. And where did JD and Patrick come in? You started, I guess, when you arrived to sit down with them, or did it all start with Jay and Patrick?
It was kind of an interesting process because they were so buried at the point getting the script done when I first came in that I actually worked more directly with JA conceptually to start with than I worked with the showrunners. So I had some very initial conversations with JD and Patrick about what the tone is and what the characteristics of the world are and what they wanted to emphasize, what was important to them. But pretty much from that point, then they kind of left it with JA and I, and then Wayne Yip and I, when we were doing the Numenor work, to kind of come up and shape the ideas of those visuals and then go back to them. They did do a couple of times where they would sit us down, and we had a war room where we put up all the concept art in a room where we could gather everybody and have that art on the wall. And there were a couple of times that we asked them to just sit down and talk us through each culture. Like, what are the important beats that you care about in each culture, the history, the things you want to make sure we're telling. And so JA and stunts and visual effects and special effects and makeup, and costume, we'd all props, we'd all sit in that, the big bunch of our art department people would all sit in that room and hear them tell us what the broad strokes that they wanted us to get to. But then it would be more the specifics working with the directors, and then coming back and doing a presentation. I would do a presentation to JA. We'd work some details out. I'd go back. I'd work some more stuff out with JA, and then we'd have a big meeting with JA and Belen, his producer, and the showrunners and Lindsay, and work out then together what was working and what wasn't working. But a lot of the times, because they had kind of given us some pretty clear signposts, that we were able to move fairly efficiently forward. They liked what we were bringing to the table and would give us a little bit of a kick or a nudge there. But for the most part, we were able to kind of just keep moving forward. Some things were super complicated. Trying to figure out how to forge the ring, that was a very complicated process. And that they were more involved directly in than Wayne was specifically, because there were certain beats that they were really distinctly looking for. So that became a relationship that was more one-on-one or two-on-one, I guess, with JD and Patrick, to try to figure that out, than it was working with the director.
But for a director anyway, coming in, as I said, because you cannot rely on anything being done before visually, because each script was so different and each world was so different. So the most important work that we relied on, Alex and I, was your concept art. So we really studied that and tried to be faithful to it, but also come up with another. I mean, everything started from there. And
yeah, I mean, it's always meant as a starting point. It's never really meant, even when it's got an official stamp on it and it's approved, that's only really the starting point, because now you actually have to make it real. And there's going to be so many other things that come in between that concept art and the day when you've got the camera there. Storylines are going to shift, and materials aren't going to show up when you think the materials are going to show up, or somebody's going to come up with a great stunt idea that you hadn't allowed for, and you have to figure that out in. But it's without that concept art, I really wouldn't know how to do my job, because it is the place where we can all agree on the basics,
Yeah, well, that was the way to do it. And it was a very specific show when it comes to, obviously. Did you know the books very well before you started?
I did, yeah. There was something that I as a 10-year-old, I got introduced to them, and I just fell in love. And back in the day, in the 70s, I think anything I could get my hands on about Lord of the Rings or Tolkien in Cheyenne, Wyoming, wasn't like the hub of the world, but so I did. I was definitely one of those geeks before it was cool to be a geek.
Yeah, that was same for me.
Yeah.
Them very early on, yeah. And it was incredible to be able to get into it so much.
Yeah.
Find the light, and the shadow will not find you.
Together we can survive this!
Fight with me.
Each of us must decide who we shall be.
There can be no trust between hammer and rock. Eventually, one or the other must surely break.
You have been told many lies of Middle-earth.
I mean, what's the best part of the job for me is really the opportunity to work with other people like you and like Alex, and like the showrunners, who care very much about the world we're building, and the story we're telling, particularly when it's really coming from that basis. Like I've done projects before where it's all about, ooh, we'll do this because it's cool, and you're like, okay, great, we'll do that because it's cool. But the idea that the idea that we are working on something that we all care deeply about with really good people whose hearts are in the right places and are passionate about what we're doing. That's the best part of what we do.
Yeah, well, it was actually extremely nice to talk to you again and get a chance to talk to you again, Ramsey.
Yes,
because
it really
we almost
was.
bumped into each other a few months ago, I think.
Yeah.
On something else that we shouldn't talk about, maybe. But
right.
But no, it's really, really amazing to be able to tell you how inspiring the first season was for me, and how important you were to the. I mean, obviously, for Alex and me to create this look to help us through Middle Earth. So it was fantastic to speak to you again and to see you like this.
Really
I hope
good.
to see you again soon.
I would love that. I really would love the chance to do another project together.